Nora grabbed the auctioneer's wrist with both hands and wouldn't let go. She was 8 years old barefoot and her whole body was shaking. But her voice didn't shake. "You are not selling her," she said. "You hear me? You are not selling my sister." The auctioneer pried her fingers off like she was nothing. The crowd laughed. Elder Silas Pruitt stood on the church steps with his arms folded and watched. Nobody moved to help. Then boots hit the dirt, slow, heavy, deliberate. And one man changed everything. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to our channel right now and stay with us until the very end, because you will not believe where this journey leads. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from so we can see just how far this story travels. The gavel came down so hard the wooden block cracked, and Nora felt the sound in her back teeth. She'd heard that sound before. Twice. Once when the bank came for their mother's land, and the man in the gray suit brought the hammer down on the kitchen table like he was killing something. And once at the funeral, when the undertaker shut the pine lid on her mother's casket, and the latch clicked into place with that same flat final sound that meant a thing was over and couldn't be undone. Both times, it had meant gone. Both times, it had meant forever. She wasn't going to let it mean that again. "Sold separately," the auctioneer called out. He mopped sweat from the back of his neck with a cloth that had never been clean in its life. "We'll begin with the elder girl. 8 years old. Strong constitution. Good teeth." Rosie pressed her face harder into Nora's side. Her fingers had twisted so deep into Nora's dress that the fabric was starting to tear at the shoulder seam. She was 4 years old, and she didn't fully understand what was happening, but she understood enough. She understood the crowd was staring. She understood that Nora's heartbeat had gotten fast and wrong under her ear. "Don't let go," Rosie whispered. "I ain't letting go," Nora said. "I swear it on Mama's grave." The auctioneer gestured at Nora like she was something hanging in a shop window. "Now who'll start the bidding, girl this age? She's worth her keep 3 times over. Kitchen work, laundry field support." A man near the front shifted forward. He was thick through the shoulders and had a smear of something dark across his apron that Nora didn't want to think about. Harlan Fitch. He ran the butcher shop on the corner of Main and 2nd. Nora had seen him every Saturday her whole life when her mother bought the week's meat. He'd always called her Mama Sweetheart, in a voice that made her mama's jaw go tight. $3, Fitch said. "For the older one. Just her." $3, the auctioneer echoed. "Do I hear 4? Nora stepped to the edge of the platform and looked Harlan Fitch straight in the eye. "I ain't going with you," she said. Fitch smiled. It was the kind of smile that had too many teeth in it. "You don't get a vote, sweetheart." "That's what you think." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Not kind laughter, the kind that meant they thought she was funny because she was small, and they were not. Elder Silas Pruitt descended from the church steps, like a man who was accustomed to crowds parting for him, and they did. He was tall and lean, with a jaw like a fence post and eyes the color of flint. He wore the same black coat every day of the year, regardless of weather, and he wore it now in the August heat, like the heat didn't dare touch him. He'd been running the Red Hollow Church Board for 15 years. He'd run most of Harlan's Creek longer than that. He'd certainly been running this auction since the moment he signed the authorization papers with his own hand and called it charity. "Continue," Pruitt said, and his voice made the word sound like a door slamming. The auctioneer straightened. $4, do I hear 4? "She ain't for sale," Nora said again. Louder this time. "Neither one of us is." Pruitt looked at her with the patience of a man swatting a fly. "Child, you are a ward of this territory. That means the county decides your placement, not you. The county put us on a block and is selling us to a butcher. If that's the county's best idea, the county ain't worth listening to." Somebody in the crowd drew a sharp breath. A woman in the 3rd row put her hand over her mouth. 2 men near the back exchanged a look. Pruitt's jaw tightened by 1 degree. "Control that child," he said to no one in particular. To everyone in general. A man from the crowd stepped forward and grabbed Nora's arm. She twisted hard the way her mother had taught her when she was 6, sharp and sudden, rotating into the grip instead of away from it, and the man lost his hold. She stumbled backward, caught Rosie, and for one sickening second, both of them were at the edge of the platform with nothing behind them but 6 feet of empty air. The crowd gasped. Nobody moved. Not one person in that crowd of 30-some adults took a single step toward 2 little girls about to fall off a platform. Then, boots hit the dirt. Nora heard them before she saw the man. Slow, unhurried, like a person who had made a decision and had nothing left to be afraid of. The crowd moved without knowing why, people stepping aside the way water steps aside for a stone dropped into it. He wasn't running. He wasn't shouting. He was just walking, and somehow that was worse for everyone watching than if he had been. Cole Whitaker was 40 years old and looked every one of them. He hadn't slept well in 8 months. He hadn't shaved in 2 weeks. He'd come into Harlan's Creek that morning for fence wire and lamp oil and a sack of flour, and he was already regretting every moment of it. He hadn't planned to stop at the town square. He'd heard the noise and kept walking. He'd told himself it wasn't his business. He'd told himself a man who could barely get himself out of bed in the morning had no business taking on other people's troubles. He'd been standing against the post outside the hardware store for 22 minutes, and he'd told himself that lie 11 times. He walked to the platform. He looked up at Nora. She was still at the edge. She had Rosie gripped against her hip with one arm. Her other arm was out for balance. Her jaw was set the way he'd only ever seen on soldiers and on people who had nothing left to lose. She looked at him. He looked at her. "You got her," he said. Nora blinked. It was not the question she'd expected. "Yeah," she said. "I got her." "Step back from the edge." She did. Cole turned to the auctioneer. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "How much for both of them?" The auctioneer blinked like a man who'd been asked a question in a language he hadn't expected. "Sir, the bids are placed separately. The procedure requires—" "I didn't ask about procedure." Cole reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. He set it on the platform with a sound that meant weight, meant finality, meant this conversation is over. "Both of them. What's the number?" Another ripple through the crowd. Different from the laughter. Harder to name. Pruitt descended the last church step and walked toward the platform. He stopped 6 feet from Cole and studied him the way a man studies something he doesn't yet know how to manage. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, "I know who you are. Widower. No children. No current church standing. You haven't attended a service since your wife passed." "That's right." "On what basis do you claim fitness to take custody of 2 minor girls?" Cole picked up the leather pouch. He held it out to the auctioneer and waited until the man took it. "On the basis," he said, "that I'm the only one in this square who's trying." Nobody laughed this time. Pruitt's voice went flat, the way it did when he was angry and didn't want anyone to see it. "This is not how this process works, sir." "Then tell me how it works." Cole turned to face the crowd. All of them. Every man in a good hat, and every woman with a church ribbon, and every person who had stood there for the last 40 minutes watching 2 children get auctioned in the August heat. "Tell me how a Christian town sells orphan children on a Sunday morning and goes home for supper. Tell me how that works, elder. I'd genuinely like to understand it." The silence was the kind that presses down on a room. Fitch the butcher turned red through the collar. "Now see here, I've got a legitimate need for—" "You've got a kitchen," Cole said. He didn't look at Fitch. "And you wanted a child to work it." He looked at Pruitt. "And you called that a placement." The auctioneer looked at the pouch in his hands. He looked at Pruitt. He looked at the crowd. He looked at 2 little girls on a platform, one of whom was staring at Cole Whitaker with an expression that was not trust and not gratitude, but something harder and more complicated than either. The gavel came down. "Sold. Both girls to Cole Whitaker." Rosie pressed her face into Nora's neck and started crying the way she cried when she was too tired to make noise about it. Nora didn't look away from Cole. She watched him the way an animal watches a hand reaching toward it. Still. Measuring. He didn't smile at her. He didn't crouch down and talk to her like she was younger than she was. He just said, "Wagons on 2nd Street. You coming?" "Where are you taking us?" Nora said. "My ranch. 7 miles out." "What for?" He looked at her for a moment. "Supper, and a bed that ain't the county workhouse floor." He turned and started walking. Nora stood on the platform for 3 full seconds. She looked at Pruitt. Pruitt's eyes were already somewhere else, already calculating something she couldn't see. She looked at Mrs. Cornelia Vance, who stood to Pruitt's left with a parasol and a look like she'd bitten into something sour and was deciding whether to spit it out. Cornelia Vance had sat behind Nora's mother at church for 6 years and whispered about her for 5 of them. "Poor things," Mrs. Vance said loud enough for the whole front row. Their mother was exactly this kind of burden. No husband, no standing, no sense. It was only ever going to end this way. Nora heard every word. She filed it away in the place inside herself where she kept all the things people said about her mother when they thought she was too young to understand. That place was getting full. She picked up Rosie and climbed down from the platform. She followed Cole Whitaker to his wagon without looking back. The ride out of Harlan's Creek took 40 minutes. Cole didn't speak. Rosie fell asleep inside of her head on Nora's lap, one hand gripping the hem of Nora's dress. Nora didn't sleep. She sat in the wagon bed with her back against the side rail and watched the back of Cole's head and ran through every possibility she could think of. Her mother had told her near the end, when the coughing had gotten bad enough that talking was work, and every word cost something that people always had a reason. Even the kind ones. Especially the kind ones. Nora had asked her what that meant, and her mother had said it means you watch. You always watch. Nora was watching. "You a church man?" she asked finally. Cole's shoulders didn't move. "Used to be." "What happened?" Silence. Then, "Church didn't show up when I needed it." "That's why you came to the auction. Because the church didn't show up for you." He glanced back over his shoulder. "I came to the auction for fence wire." Nora considered that. "So you didn't plan it?" "No. You just saw us and decided." "Something like that." "What did you decide exactly?" Cole let out a slow breath. The horse's ears flicked. The road stretched out ahead of them flat and dry and going nowhere fast. "I decided I was done watching," he said. Nora was quiet for a while. Rosie made a small sound in her sleep and turned her face deeper into Nora's lap. Nora smoothed her hair without thinking about it. It was a thing she did 100 times a day. Her hands knew the motion better than her mind did. "You got any children?" Nora asked. The muscles in Cole's shoulders went rigid for 1 second. Then they released. "No," he said. "Had a son. He didn't make it past 3 days." A pause. "His mother didn't make it past 3 weeks." Nora absorbed that. "I'm sorry," she said. "Everybody's sorry." "I know. Me too. Sorry don't change nothing." He turned and looked at her again, this time longer. "No," he said. "It don't." She nodded once. "So don't say it again then. Just do what you're going to do." "That's the plan." "What is the plan exactly?" "Supper, sleep. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." "You said that already." "It's still the plan." Nora pulled her knees to her chest. She watched the last of Harlan's Creek disappear behind a ridge of dust. "That man at the auction," she said. "Pruitt. He had a look on his face when you took us. Like you stole something. Maybe he thought I did. He's going to come after us." Cole didn't answer for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to. Then he said, "Probably." "What'll you do?" "Whatever I have to." "You don't even know us." "I know enough." "What do you know?" He was quiet for another beat. Then he said, "I know you stood in front of your sister when the whole town looked the other way. I know you fought with nothing but your voice and your two hands. And I know a child who does that has got more backbone than most men I've ever worked alongside." Nora's throat moved. She looked out at the flat land passing by. She didn't say anything else for the rest of the ride. When they reached the ranch, it was late afternoon. The sky gone amber and orange, the kind of light that makes even broken things look like they might be all right. The house was plain wood frame, a porch that needed one of its boards replacing a barn that had seen better decades. A dog lifted his gray head from the porch steps and regarded them without urgency. "That's Bo," Cole said. "He's old. Don't let it worry you." Rosie woke up when the wagon stopped. She blinked, saw the dog, and was out of Nora's arms before Nora could grab her. She hit the ground running, which was more than Nora had seen her do in 3 weeks, and dropped to her knees in front of Bo and put both hands on his face. "Hello," Rosie announced. Bo sniffed her wrist. Then he licked her palm with the slow, deliberate affection of a dog who had decided she was acceptable. Rosie laughed. It was the sound Nora had been waiting to hear since the day their mother stopped breathing. It came out of the little girl like something uncaged, sudden and bright, and it hit Nora somewhere between the ribs in a way she hadn't expected. Cole climbed down from the wagon and watched both girls without speaking. There was something in his face that he wasn't showing all of yet. Nora could see the edge of it, but not the shape. "You coming down?" he said. Nora climbed down slowly. She stood in the dirt and looked at the house. She looked at the fence. She looked at the fields beyond the fence, and beyond those, the flat Texas distance that went on until it became sky. She looked at every window. She counted the exits. She identified the road they'd come in on and calculated how long it would take to reach the main road with Rosie on her hip if she had to run. Her mother had taught her that too. You always know the way out. "How long are we staying?" she asked. "Long as you need." "That ain't an answer." Cole looked at her, really looked the way adults almost never did, like he was actually seeing her and not just a problem that had been handed to him. "No," he said. "Reckon it ain't." He walked inside. The screen door creaked behind him. Nora stood in the yard for a full minute. Then she looked at Rosie, who was now lying flat on the porch with her face pressed against Bo's side, having apparently decided this was the finest thing that had ever happened to her. "Rosie," Nora said, "don't get comfortable." Rosie didn't answer. She was already most of the way back to sleep, one hand resting on the dog's ear. Nora sat down on the top step. She positioned herself between the door and her sister. She watched the road. She watched the dust. She watched the place where the road bent around the ridge and disappeared, because anything coming from town would come from there. That was her post. It had always been her post. Inside, Cole stood at the kitchen counter with both hands flat on the wood and stared at the hook beside the window where his wife's apron still hung. 8 months, and he hadn't moved it. He hadn't decided whether that made him devoted or a fool, and most days he didn't have the energy to figure out which. He'd walked into town for fence wire and walked back out with 2 orphan girls and a war with the most powerful man in Harlan's Creek. "You damn fool," he said to himself. His voice came out rough from disuse, but then he heard it again in his head. The 8-year-old's voice cutting through 30 grown adults like a blade through smoke. "You are not selling my sister." He pulled 2 plates from the shelf. He found bread that wasn't too stale. He cut cured ham and filled 2 cups from the water barrel. He carried them to the porch and set one beside Nora without a word. He set the other within reach of Rosie. Then he sat at the far end of the porch with 6 feet of space between himself and the older girl and did not look at her directly. Nora looked at the plate. She looked at him. She looked at the plate again. "It ain't poisoned," he said. "I didn't say it was." "Then eat." She picked up the bread and took a small bite. Chewed it careful and slow, testing it the way a person tests a thing they've learned not to trust. Then she ate the rest so fast he thought she might choke. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked. Nora didn't answer. She reached for the ham. Cole nodded. He understood. He'd spent enough time unable to eat that he recognized the look of someone making up for lost time. "There's more inside," he said. "Whenever you want, day or night. You don't have to ask." Nora wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and looked at the road. "Pruitt's going to come," she said. "Ain't he?" "Most likely. Soon. He's a man who doesn't like to be embarrassed in public. He'll move fast." Nora pulled her knees up. She wrapped her arms around them. "Can you stop him?" Cole was quiet for a moment. "I aim to." "That ain't the same as yes." "No, it ain't. At least you don't lie." She was quiet for a moment. "Mama said most people lie when the truth is hard. She said it don't make them bad, just scared. She said scared people are more dangerous than mean ones, because at least mean ones know what they are." "Your mama sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was." Nora didn't look at him when she said the next part. "She's gone." The words fell between them like stones dropped in still water, flat and final. "I know," Cole said. "Then you don't need to say you're sorry. You said you wouldn't." "I wasn't going to." A pause. Then something shifted in Nora's posture. Not much. Not enough that a person not paying close attention would notice. But she uncrossed her arms, just slightly. "Mr. she said. "Whitaker, or Cole. Either one. Mr. Whitaker." She still wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were on the ridge where the road bent. "Whatever happens, whatever Pruitt does, don't let them take her separate. You hear me? Whatever else goes wrong, don't let them split us up." Cole looked at this girl. Sunburned neck, bare feet black from road dust. A tear in her dress at the shoulder where the man at the auction had grabbed and she had twisted away. She looked like what she was, a child who had been carrying a grown woman's weight for however long it had taken her mother to die, and who had no intention of putting it down just because a stranger had offered her supper. He felt something shift in his own chest. Not gentle, not gradual. Like something that had been locked for 8 months had finally met a key it hadn't known it was waiting for. "I won't," he said. Nora studied his face the way she'd been studying it since the wagon, looking for the crack, looking for the angle, looking for the thing her mother had told her was always there if you watched long enough. She looked for a long time. Then she gave one small nod. It was not trust, not yet. But it was the door opening 1 inch, just enough for light to come through. And in Nora's world, 1 inch was more than most people had ever given her. That night, Cole made up the small room at the end of the hall. Clean sheets, 2 pillows, a quilt his wife had stitched the winter before she died. Blue and white stars and squares. He hadn't put it on any bed since she passed. He put it on this one. Nora stood in the doorway and looked at the room. She looked at the window. She looked at the door. "There, a lock," she said. Cole pointed to the latch on the inside of the door. Beside it, on a small hook, hung an iron key. "Locks from the inside," he said. "Key's right there." Nora looked at the key. "You're giving it to me." "It's your room." "You could take it back." "It's your room," he said again. "Your door. Your choice who comes through it." Something moved across Nora's face, quick as a shadow across water. Then it was gone, sealed away behind whatever wall she'd spent 8 years building and 8 harder months reinforcing. "Good night, Mr. Whitaker," she said. "Good night, Nora." He walked back down the hall. He heard the door close. He heard the latch click. He heard the key turn. And for the first time since the silence had moved into his house like a border, he couldn't evict Cole. Whitaker didn't feel the quiet as absence. He felt it as something with weight and shape and possibility. He went to bed. Down the hall, Nora lay beside Rosie in the dark, with one arm draped across her sister's chest, counting the small rises and falls of her breathing, the way she counted them every night. Still here. Still breathing. Still together. She looked at the ceiling. She listened to the sounds of the house settling the creak of the old wood, the wind off the flat land, the distant low of cattle. She thought about Pruitt's face when Cole had set that pouch on the platform. The way his jaw had moved, but no words had come out. She thought about the key in the lock. She thought about the way Cole had said, "It's your room," the second time. Not like a man making a point. Like a man who meant it so simply that making a point hadn't occurred to him. She didn't plan an escape route. She didn't count the windows. She closed her eyes and listened to her sister breathe. And for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, she didn't have to hold the whole world together by herself while she did it. It wasn't trust, not yet. But it was the first night she didn't have to fight the dark to fall asleep. And in the morning, there would be more to come. Because Elder Silas Pruitt had not lived this long by letting things go, and a man who nails a threat to your barn before sunrise does not stop at one. The real storm hadn't started yet. But for now, on a ranch 7 miles from Harlan's Creek, two sisters slept in a room with a locked door, and outside on the porch, an old gray dog kept watch. And somewhere down the hall, a man who had come to town for fence wire stared at the ceiling and began for the first time in 8 months to think about what came next. Nora woke before dawn to the sound of a man losing an argument with a stove. She lay still for a moment, one arm across Rosie, listening. The clang of iron. A hiss of something wet hitting something too hot. Then Cole's voice, low and frustrated, directed at no one and nothing in particular. A sound followed that was either a curse or a prayer, and from the tone of it probably both. Then the smell hit her. Burned bread. Unmistakable. She was out of bed before she made the conscious decision to move. She unlocked the door, padded barefoot down the hall, and stopped at the kitchen doorway. Cole was standing at the counter, holding a blackened loaf with his bare hand, shaking his fingers like a man who knew better and had done it anyway. He set the loaf down on the counter and turned, and when he saw Nora standing there in the doorway, he straightened the way a person straightens when they've been caught doing something they're not proud of. "You're supposed to use a cloth," Nora said. "I'm aware of that." "So why didn't you?" "Because I couldn't find where she kept them." He said it flatly, and Nora understood, without being told, that she was the she who wasn't Margaret, and that this was not the first morning Cole had stood in this kitchen, losing a small private war against objects that used to belong to someone else. Nora crossed the kitchen without being invited. She opened the second drawer beside the basin and pulled out a folded kitchen rag. She set it on the counter next to the ruined bread without ceremony. "Second drawer," she said. "That's where my mama kept hers too." Cole looked at the rag for a moment, like it was heavier than it appeared. Then he said, "Thank you." Nora picked up the blackened loaf and knocked on the bottom with her knuckle. It was solid as river rock. "You got eggs?" she asked. "In the coop." "I'll get them. You boil water, and don't touch that stove again without the cloth." She was out the door before he could respond. Cole stood alone in his kitchen water on to boil, taking orders from an 8-year-old girl he'd known for less than 12 hours, and the corner of his mouth pulled upward before he could stop it. It didn't last long, but it was there. By the time Nora came back with 4 eggs cradled in her skirt, Rosie was awake and sitting on the porch talking to Bo in the earnest, detailed manner of a child who saw no reason a dog wouldn't be interested in her opinions about the color of the sky. Nora cracked the eggs into the pan like she'd done it 1,000 times because she had, and Cole watched from across the kitchen without offering to help because he understood without having to be told that this was not a child playing at something. This was a child who had learned to survive, and helping without being asked would be an insult to everything that had gotten her here. They ate on the porch. Eggs, water, and the parts of the bread that weren't completely charred, which turned out to be more than Nora had expected. Rosie ate with both hands and got egg on her chin and didn't care at all. Nora sat with her back against the railing, facing the road fork in one hand. "You keep looking that direction," Cole said, "because somebody's going to come from that direction." Maybe. Nora set her fork down. Not maybe. That man at the auction, Pruitt, he had a lawyer's face. You know what a lawyer's face looks like? Like he's already won the argument and he's just waiting for you to figure it out. She paused. My mama had to deal with a man like that when the bank came. He was polite the whole time, real polite. And we still lost the house. Cole chewed slowly. Pruitt's not a lawyer. He's worse. He's a man who believes God's on his side. Those are the hardest ones to beat. Cole looked at her. Where'd you learn that? Mama. Nora picked up her fork again. She knew a lot. She just ran out of time to teach me all of it. He didn't answer that. He let it sit the way it deserved to, without filling the space around it with useless words. After breakfast, Nora helped clear the plates and Cole hitched the wagon. He said they needed to go into Harlan's Creek. He said both girls needed shoes. Nora's face went white before he finished the sentence. I ain't going back there. You need shoes, both of you. I'll go barefoot the rest of my life first. Nora. Don't Nora me like you know me. Those people stood there and watched us get sold. They laughed. I saw their faces. Every single one of them. Cole crouched down to her level. He did it slowly, not suddenly the way you move around a thing that has good reason to startle. I know what they did, he said. And I know going back into that town feels like walking back into the fire. But here's what I also know. If you hide from them, they win something they didn't earn. You walk into that town with your chin up and you let every one of them see that they didn't break you. That's not weakness. That's the only kind of fighting that lasts. Nora stared at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Rosie, who was braiding Bo's tail with the focused concentration of a professional. Fine, Nora said. But if anyone calls us auction girls, I'm throwing something. Cole stood up. That's fair. The ride into Harlan's Creek was silent and tense. Nora sat in the back with Rosie in her lap and her face set like weathered stone, watching every passing wagon and every person on foot with the flat cataloging gaze of a child who had learned that adults were capable of anything. They'd been in town 5 minutes when it started. Walt Dunmore, who ran the general store, looked up when they came through the door, and his smile was performing itself before the rest of his face could catch up. He was a thin man, with a thin mustache, and the particular discomfort of someone who had a conscience that was frequently inconvenient. Cole, he said carefully, heard about your purchase. Shoes, Cole said. Something sturdy, both girls. Dunmore glanced at Nora and Rosie like they were something left on his counter by someone he was afraid of. I got some in the back, but Cole Elder Pruitt was here this morning. He's talking about a formal petition to the county board. Says you got no legal standing, that a widower with no kin and no church standing ain't fit for guardianship. Cole picked up a pair of small leather boots and checked the sole. These run true to size. Cole, I'm trying to warn you. And I'm trying to buy shoes. Cole set the boots on the counter. How much? Dunmore shook his head slowly like a man watching a wagon roll downhill without a brake. He wrote up the sale. Nora stood perfectly still through all of it, her eyes moving between the two men, filing everything away, understanding more than either of them knew. She understood. They stepped outside and nearly walked straight into Mrs. Cornelia Vance. She was wearing her Sunday hat on a Wednesday, which meant she had dressed for an occasion that she herself had arranged. Behind her stood two women from the church quilting circle, the kind of women who whispered behind their hands and called it fellowship and meant it as something sharper. Mr. Whitaker, Mrs. Vance said. Her voice was sweet in the way that syrup left too long in a jar goes sweet and thick and wrong. And the girls, how are you settling in Deers? Rosie, who had no use for social performance, held up her new shoes. We got boots. Mrs. Vance smiled thinly. How generous of Mr. Whitaker. She turned her attention upward toward Cole. Tell me, will you also be arranging proper Christian instruction for them? A woman's influence in the home. Two young girls require. They require what they require, Cole said, and I'll see to it. A man alone cannot possibly understand what young girls need. Cole's voice dropped not louder, lower, which was considerably more effective. I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Vance. I don't recall asking for it. Mrs. Vance's smile contracted. I'm not the one you need to worry about, Mr. Whitaker. Elder Pruitt has already written to the county. He's requesting a formal review. This matter won't be settled over a shop counter. She opened her parasol with a small decisive snap and turned away. Her two companions followed like shadows that had learned to keep pace. Nora watched them go. She's going to be a problem, she said. Already is, Cole said. The county thing. Is that real? Most likely. What happens if the county says we have to go? Cole helped Rosie into the wagon and climbed up to take the reins. He was quiet for long enough that Nora thought he might not answer. When he did, it was quiet and certain, the voice of a man who had already made a decision in some private part of himself and was only now letting the words catch up. Then the county and I are going to have a disagreement. Nora stared at the back of his head. Then she pulled on her new boots, laced them tight, and sat up straighter. They were halfway home when Sheriff Jack Farrow came riding toward them from the direction of town. He pulled alongside the wagon and tipped his hat. He was a solid man in his late 40s, with a gray-streaked beard and the permanently tired eyes of someone who had been solving other people's problems for so long he'd forgotten he was allowed to have his own. Cole, he said. Jack. Farrow looked at the girls. He dropped his voice low, though. From Nora's position in the wagon bed, it made no appreciable difference. She heard every word the same way she always heard every word that adults assumed she couldn't. Pruitt filed a petition this morning with the county board. Hearing set for next Friday. He's arguing moral unfitness, says a widower with no church standing and no female presence in the home ain't a suitable guardian for two girls. Cole's hands went still on the reins. What are my options? You speak for yourself in front of the board and hope they've got more sense than Pruitt gives them credit for. Farrow glanced toward the wagon bed. His eyes met Nora's. He looked away. That older girl, she's sharp. I'm aware. Sharp enough to testify if it came to it. I ain't putting a child in front of that board. Then you better have something else. Farrow put his hat back on. Pruitt ain't just trying to take those girls, Cole. He's making an example. You overruled him in public in front of the whole town. A man like that doesn't file paperwork because he cares about orphans. He files paperwork because his pride is bleeding and he wants it stopped. I know. Friday, County Hall, 2 o'clock. He tipped his hat at the wagon and rode on. Cole sat still for a moment. Then he clicked his tongue, and the horse moved, and the wagon rolled forward. I heard all of that, Nora said. I figured. Friday is 5 days. I can count. Can you win? Cole didn't answer right away. I don't know. That ain't good enough. It's honest. Nora pulled her knees up. She stared at the road unspooling behind them, the flat Texas distance swallowing the town whole. I can talk to them, she said quietly. The board. I can tell them what the auction was like, what Pruitt said, the way people looked at us. She paused. I ain't scared of them. I know you ain't. I'm scared of going back to where we were. That's different. Cole turned and looked at her over his shoulder. She was sitting in the wagon bed with her arms wrapped around her knees, and she looked exactly like what she was, a little girl who was terrified and planning at the same time, because for her, those two things had never been allowed to exist separately. Let me go in first, he said. If I can't get it done, then you can speak. But only if you choose to. Nobody makes you. Nora held his gaze for a moment. Deal? She said. That night she found him on the porch in the dark after Rosie had gone to sleep. She sat down 3 feet away from him. Closer than the first night, but with the careful deliberateness of a distance she had chosen herself. Mr. Whitaker, she said. Cole. Mr. Whitaker. She picked at a splinter in the porch rail. That woman today, Vance. She said you can't know what girls need because you're alone. She did. My mama raised us alone, no man at all, and she knew what we needed better than anybody. Nora paused. So when people say a person alone can't raise children right, they're wrong. My mama proved it. She did, Cole said. You ain't my mama, Nora said quickly, like she needed to get the words out before he could misunderstand them. I ain't saying that. I know. But you burn bread the same way she did, and you look at Rosie the same way she did, like she's made of something you're scared to hold too tight. A pause. Mama looked at me like that too. She used to say we were borrowed, like the world let her have us for a while, and she was always waiting for it to ask for us back. Cole turned his face toward the dark field. His jaw moved. When he spoke, his voice was rough in the way of a man keeping something contained. Holding careful ain't weakness, he said. That's knowing what you got. Nora was quiet for a long time. Then she reached into her pocket. I found something, she said. Under the quilt, a locket. She held it out on her palm. Gold chain, worn smooth. There's a picture inside, a woman with dark hair. Cole went very still. I think it was your wife, Nora said. It was. She's pretty. She was. Nora held the locket out toward him. You should have this back. It don't belong to us. Cole looked at it for a long moment. He didn't take it. Keep it in the room, he said. Margaret would have wanted it there. Nora closed her fingers around the chain. She held it against her chest for a moment, feeling the small weight of it, the cool metal warming against her palm, understanding, without being able to name it, that a man who left his dead wife's locket in a stranger's room and called it belonging was doing something larger than she had words for yet. Good night, Mr. Whitaker, she said. Good night, Nora. She went inside. The lock turned. Cole sat in the dark for another long while, listening to the land settle and breathe around him, thinking about Friday, thinking about Pruitt, thinking about a little girl who spoke like someone twice her age and fought like someone 3 times her size, and was somehow inexplicably beginning to make this hollow house feel like something other than a place where he was waiting to stop hurting. He'd walked into town for fence wire. He still hadn't gotten the fence wire. He reckoned it could wait. The next morning he found a note nailed to the barn door. 2 lines written in a hand that made no effort to disguise itself, which was its own kind of threat. Bought things can be returned. Friday comes fast. Nora was behind him. She'd found it before he had pulled it down and brought it to him in the kitchen without a word. She laid it on the table and stepped back and crossed her arms and waited. He read it. He folded it. He put it in his shirt pocket. What are you going to do? Nora asked. Nothing yet. Nothing. Her voice was flat and disbelieving. Someone came onto this land in the night while we were sleeping. I know. And you're just going to... Nora. His voice was firm, but without an edge. Nothing and thinking are different things. Pruitt wants me angry. He wants me to ride into town and make a scene so he can tell the board I'm unstable. I ain't giving him that satisfaction. Nora stared at him. Her arms were still crossed. Her jaw was set. Then slowly she uncrossed her arms. You're smarter than you look, she said. That's generous. I still don't trust you all the way. I wouldn't expect you to. But I trust you more than I did yesterday. She picked up the egg basket from beside the door. That count for something. Cole looked at her. That counts for everything. Nora held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then she walked out to the coop without another word. But just before the screen door swung shut behind her, Cole would have sworn he saw something cross her face in the fraction of a second before she turned away. Not a smile exactly. The memory of one. The shape a smile leaves behind when it's been gone so long, the muscles have almost forgotten the motion, but haven't quite let go. He poured himself a cup of water and stood at the window and watched her cross the yard. This girl who had been sold in a public square 4 days ago and was now collecting eggs in his chicken coop like she was deciding whether this place was worth the effort of staying in. Friday was 4 days away. Pruitt had his petition and his church board and his 15 years of authority in this town. Cole had 40 acres, a dog, and a child who trusted him more than she had yesterday and less than she might tomorrow. He'd faced worse odds, he thought. He was no longer entirely sure. The 4 days between the note on the barn and the county hearing passed the way bad weather passes when you can see it coming from a long way off. Slow, heavy, inevitable. Cole spent the first day fixing the fence on the south pasture. He needed something to do with his hands, something that required enough concentration to keep his mind from running ahead of itself to Friday and everything that could go wrong there. Nora sat on the top rail and watched him work and told him twice that he was doing it wrong, and both times she was right. The second day, a woman named Ada Hollis rode out from the neighboring ranch with a pot of beans and a look on her face that meant she'd heard everything and had decided to come see for herself. She was 70 years old and half blind, and she sat on Cole's porch and talked to Rosie about a mule she'd owned in 1851 that could predict rain, and Rosie listened with the devoted attention of someone receiving gospel. Nora ate Ada's beans and watched the old woman the whole time with careful measuring eyes, and when Ada left, she said quietly, and to no one in particular, that she supposed not every person in Harlan's Creek was a complete waste of breathing. Cole took that as progress. The third day brought Sheriff Farrow back to the ranch, and Nora saw him from the yard before he reached the gate, and knew from his posture that the news was worse than before. She left the chicken coop and walked to the fence and stood there and listened without pretending she wasn't. Farrow dismounted and turned his hat in his hands. "Pruitt's brought in a couple from up near Wichita," he said. "Name of Hargrove. Philip and Louise. Church people, money people. They've made a formal offer to the board for the younger girl." Cole's face didn't move, but his knuckles went white around the fence post. "Just Rosie. Just the younger one. They said, and I'm giving you Pruitt's exact words here, that the older girl is too old and too willful for their purposes." Nora heard it. She was standing close enough that she could not have missed it, and she didn't flinch, which was its own kind of heartbreak. She just went very still, the way a person goes still when they hear something that confirms what they already suspected and had been hoping was wrong. She had always known it. The world had been telling her version of it her whole life, in the way people smiled easier. At Rosie reached for Rosie, first softened their voices when Rosie cried. Rosie was small and sweet and easy. Nora was sharp and loud and difficult, and asked questions that made people uncomfortable, and she had made her peace with that a long time ago, or told herself she had, which is not the same thing at all. Hearing it spoken out loud by a stranger who had never met her, still cut somewhere, she didn't have armor. "They ain't getting either of them," Cole said. His voice had gone very quiet, that particular quiet that was not calm, but the thing underneath calm, the bedrock that calm sits on when it runs out. "Cole, these people have money and standing and a lawyer already retained. Pruitt's presenting them as the morally correct alternative to—" Farrow paused. His words were an unmarried man playing house with purchased children. "He arranged the purchase. I know that. He stood on those church steps and signed the authorization and watched it happen. I know that too." Farrow looked tired in the way of a man who knew the right thing and had limited power to make it happen. What you need is someone to stand up in that room and say those girls are safe with you. Someone the board respects. You got 2 days, Cole. Use them. After Farrow rode off, Nora walked down from the fence and stood in front of Cole. Her hands were balled at her sides. Her face was unreadable in the way that meant she was reading everything at once and keeping it internal. "They want Rosie," she said. "They ain't getting her. They don't want me." She lifted her chin. "Too old. Too willful." A pause. "They're right. I am willful. I talk back. I don't do what I'm told the first time. I ask questions people don't want to answer. I ain't going to apologize for any of that." "I ain't asking you to." "Then what are you asking?" Cole looked at her directly. I'm asking you to hear me when I tell you that too willful is the finest thing anybody said about you. Because willful is what kept your sister alive. Willful is what made you stand on that auction block and fight when every grown adult in that square had already decided you weren't worth it. Willful is what you are. Nora and I would not change one piece of it even if I could. Nora's bottom lip moved once. She caught it with her teeth and held it. Her eyes were bright, and she blinked twice fast and looked away. "You mean that?" she said. It came out less like a question than a thing she was testing for weight. "I don't say things I don't mean. It's why I don't talk much." She let out a breath that sounded like it had been stored somewhere cramped for a very long time. "Okay," she said. "Then we fight. Both of us. Together." She put out her hand, small and brown from the sun and completely steady. Cole took it. His hand was twice the size of hers. They shook once firm, the way two people shake hands when they mean the thing behind it. From the porch, Rosie called out that Bo wanted his breakfast, and couldn't someone please see to it. Nora wiped her face fast, not crying, absolutely not crying, and turned toward the house. "That dog eats too much," she muttered. "He's old," Cole said. "Let him enjoy it." Nora almost laughed. The sound caught in her throat and became something quieter, a softening at the edges of her barely visible but there. Cole saw it. He didn't say anything about it. He just followed her inside, and for the first time since she'd arrived, they walked through the door at the same time, neither one leading, neither one behind. Friday arrived the way verdicts always do, with too much wait and not enough warning, even when you knew it was coming. Cole was up before the roosters. He shaved with cold water and cut himself once above the jaw and pressed a cloth to it and kept moving. He put on his cleanest shirt, white cotton, and ran a flat iron over it on the stove with the kitchen rag, because he remembered the rag this time. He stood at the kitchen table and practiced what he was going to say to the board, talking to the empty chairs, and every version sounded either too angry or too desperate, and he threw all of them away inside his head and decided he'd say what was true, and trust that truth had some weight left in it. Nora appeared in the kitchen doorway already dressed. She'd braided her own hair and Rosie's. She'd laced her boots so tight, the leather creased across the toe. She looked at Cole's shirt and at the flat iron and said nothing, which from Nora meant she approved. "You look like you're going to war," Cole said. "Ain't I?" He couldn't argue with that. Rosie came in dragging Bo by the collar and announced that he wanted to come with them. Nora said no. Rosie said Bo had told her personally that he wanted to come. Nora said dogs don't talk. Rosie said this one did. Cole looked at both of them and said Bo would be fine and they'd be home before supper, and Rosie accepted this with the particular skepticism of a 4-year-old who suspects adults are making things up but lacks the evidence to prove it. The wagon ride into town was the longest 40 minutes Cole could remember. He kept his hand steady on the reins, and his mind ran through arguments and counters and the faces of the 3 board members. All of them Pruitt's men in one degree or another, and he could not find a version of the next 2 hours that felt solid enough to stand on. Nora climbed up to the bench beside him without asking. Not in the wagon bed. Beside him. She sat with Rosie in her lap and her face set and her eyes on the road ahead, and Cole understood without words that she was telling him they were going in together. They could see the county hall from a quarter-mile out. Wagons lined the road on both sides. People moved around the entrance in clusters. Word had traveled the way word always travels in a small town, faster than it should, and wider than anyone intended, and most of Harlan's Creek had turned out to watch. "There's a lot of people," Nora said. "Yeah." "Good," she said, and Cole looked at her. "More witnesses," she said. He pulled the wagon to a stop and set the brake. He sat for a moment, then he turned to her. "Whatever happens in there," he said, "you remember what I told you. You ain't property. You ain't a case number. You are Nora Jean Whitlock, and you are worth more than every person in that room put together." Nora's eyes went bright again. She blinked it away fast and lifted her chin and said, "Let's go." The hall was packed shoulder to shoulder and smelled of summer heat and too many people in too small a space. The crowd parted when Cole walked in. Not respectfully, uncertainly, the way people move aside for something they don't know how to categorize. Cole carried Rosie on his left arm. Nora walked on his right back, straight eyes moving across the room the way they always moved, counting exits, cataloging faces, filing information. Elder Silas Pruitt sat at the long table at the front of the room between two other board members, Harold Webb, who ran the feed store, and a retired cattleman named George Sutton, who was mostly deaf and squinted at everything like he was trying to read something written too small. They were Pruitt's men. Everyone in the room knew it. The board was dressed up as fairness, the way a trap is dressed up as shelter. Mrs. Vance sat in the front row with her fan moving at the slow, deliberate rhythm of a woman who had already decided the outcome and was simply waiting for the room to arrive at her conclusion. Beside her sat two people Nora had never seen before. A man in a good suit with a gold watch chain. A woman in gloves. In August. Everything about them said money, and everything about the way they looked at Rosie said they had already decided she was theirs. Nora spotted them before she sat down. She leaned close to Cole and said quietly, "That them? I expect so. They look like they're shopping." Cole said nothing, but his jaw moved. Pruitt opened the hearing with the measured authority of a man who had spent 30 years at a pulpit and knew exactly how silence worked as a weapon. He laid out the case in careful language designed to make Cole sound like a problem the town needed solving. Widower. No church standing. No female presence in the home. Children acquired through public sale. Every word chosen to land a certain way, and most of them landed exactly where Pruitt intended. Cole sat at the chair they'd set for him with Rosie in his lap, and Nora beside him, and his hands loose on his knees. He did not look away from Pruitt, and he did not look angry, because anger was what Pruitt was hoping for. "Mr. Whitaker," Pruitt said, turning to Cole with the expression of a man asking a question he believes he already knows the answer to. "You are an unmarried widower. You have no children of your own, no formal education. You have not attended services at Red Hollow Church in 8 months. On what basis do you claim fitness to raise 2 young girls?" "On the basis that I was the only one who tried," Cole said. A sound moved through the crowd. Not agreement exactly, something more complicated. Recognition, maybe. Pruitt pressed forward. "You purchased these children at a public auction. I paid to stop what was being done to them. There's a difference." The auction was conducted under territorial law. The auction was conducted under your authorization. You signed it. You stood on those church steps and watched a 3-year-old get sold to the highest bidder and called it placement. If that's the law working, Elder, the law needs looking at. Several people in the crowd shifted. Webb leaned toward Pruitt and whispered something. Pruitt waved him off. He introduced the Hargroves next, presenting them the way a man presents an argument he believes is unanswerable. Wealthy, church-connected, established, a proper home with 2 parents. Everything Cole was not. Cole. "They've offered a loving, stable home for the younger child," Pruitt said. "Just Rosie," Cole said. "The younger girl, yes. And Nora." Cole's voice stayed even. "Barely. What about Nora Elder? She just gets left behind. You take her sister and leave her. Where exactly back to your system? Back to the auction block? Which good Christian family is lining up for the one you're calling too willful?" Pruitt's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "The older child's placement would be handled. You'd abandon her." The words came from the crowd. A woman's voice mid-room. "That's what you're saying. Take the little one and leave the older girl behind." Pruitt turned toward the sound. "This is not a public debate." "It's a public hall," the woman said, and several people around her nodded. Cole stood up. Rosie tightened her grip on his collar but didn't make a sound. "These girls lost their mother," he said. "They lost their home. They were put on a block in the town square and sold in front of this community on a Sunday morning. The only thing they have left in this world that belongs to them is each other. And you want to take that too. In the name of what proper order Christian standards? Tell me which part of that is Christian, Elder." I'd genuinely like to know." The room held its breath. Pruitt recovered. He always recovered. "Emotion is not evidence, Mr. Whitaker. This board requires assurance. Can you provide that these children are safe, properly cared for, and raised in accordance with community standards? I can provide a clean house, hot meals, 2 girls who sleep through the night for the first time in months, and my word as a man that they will not spend one single day in my care feeling like they are something to be gotten rid of. If that ain't enough for your standards, then your standards need fixing." Then Mrs. Vance rose to speak, and she spoke with the practiced fluency of a woman who had been rehearsing this moment in her mind for a week. She spoke about Nora and Rosie's mother in the past tense with a pity that had teeth in it. She spoke about Cole's absence from church and his solitary living and the lack of a woman's guidance in the household. She spoke about community standards and moral order and what was proper, and every word was chosen to sound like concern and function like a verdict. Nora stood up. Cole reached for her arm. She was already moving, and there was nothing in her posture that allowed for stopping. "You didn't know my mama," she said. The room went still. Mrs. Vance turned with the slow, practiced patience of a woman who intended to handle this like an adult handling a child. "Sweetheart, this is not— You talked about her at church. I heard you. I was right there, and you talked about her like she wasn't anything, like she was a problem somebody forgot to solve." Nora's voice was steady, in the way that certain things are steady, not because they are unbothered, but because they have already decided not to break. "My mama worked 3 jobs so we could eat. She read us stories every night, even when she was so tired she could barely hold the book. She taught me my letters and how to milk, and how to hold Rosie when the thunder came. She was not troubled. She was tired. There is a difference. And the only thing that made her life harder than it had to be was people like you standing on the outside of it, deciding what it looked like." The silence afterward was the kind that has weight to it. Mrs. Vance's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "I got facts too," Nora said, turning to face the board. She was shaking, but her voice held. "Before Mr. Whitaker, not one person in this town wanted us. You all stood there. Some of you laughed. The butcher wanted me to scrub his kitchen. That woman in the blue bonnet wanted Rosie like a doll off a shelf." She pointed across the room, and the woman looked away. "Mr. Whitaker was the only one who said both. The only one who even thought to ask if we belonged together. And now you want to take us from the only person who ever treated us like we were people." She was crying now. She didn't wipe her face. She let it happen. "You want facts? Here is one. I lock my door every night. Mr. Whitaker gave me the key. He said it was my room, my door, my choice who came through it. Nobody ever gave me a choice before. Not once. Not ever." She sat down. Her hands were shaking. Cole put his arm around her, and she did not pull away. Then Rosie lifted her face from Cole's chest. She had been quiet the entire time, curled against him, and the room had almost forgotten she was there. She looked around at all the faces, all the strangers, all the people deciding her life, and in the clear, unself-conscious voice of a 4-year-old who had not yet learned to be afraid of rooms, she said, "Please don't take me away from Papa." The word detonated in the room like a stone through glass. Papa. Cole stopped breathing. Nora's hand flew to her mouth. Mrs. Vance sat down without being excused. Even Pruitt, who had not visibly flinched at anything in the past 2 hours, went very still. Rosie said it with the complete and devastating certainty of a small child who does not know how to be strategic and does not understand why anyone would want to be. She said it because it was true in the only way that mattered to her. She said it because Cole was the man who carried her and fed her and let Bo sleep on the porch and came home when she needed him to, and in a 4-year-old's world, that was the whole definition of the word. Sheriff Farrow stood up from the back row before the silence could collapse into chaos. He walked to the front with his hat in his hands and spoke in the plain, unhurried way of a man who had no speech prepared and no patience for the kind that was. He talked about visiting the ranch unannounced and finding it clean and solid, and full of the ordinary evidence of people being taken care of. He talked about new boots and full plates, and two girls who flinched at nothing. He talked about a man who gave a child the key to her own room because he understood that children who have had everything taken from them need to be given something back. Then he turned to the crowd. "I've also got questions," he said, "about why a wealthy couple from 60 miles away wants a 3-year-old from Harlan's Creek and not her 8-year-old sister. About why this hearing was arranged before Mr. Whitaker had any chance to file for proper guardianship. And about how a town that stood in this square and watched 2 children get auctioned is now in this hall pretending it cares what happens to them." He put his hat back on and sat down. The room erupted. Not all at once, but in the way water finds cracks through every space and gap in the order Pruitt had so carefully constructed. Women wiped their faces. Men looked at their boots. Someone near the window said, "He's right low but audible." Someone else said, "Those Hargroves ain't even from here." Pruitt banged the table. "Order!" He waited. The noise subsided, but did not stop. He looked at Cole with the flat eyes of a man who has used every tool he brought and found them insufficient. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, "the Hargroves have filed a legal counterpetition. If this board rules in their favor, will you comply with the ruling?" The room went quiet again. Cole felt Rosie's fingers curled in his shirt. He felt Nora's hand find his sleeve and grip it hard. He felt the question pressing down on him like the full weight of the August sky. And he thought about Margaret, and about what she would say if she were here, and he already knew. He had always known. He looked at Nora. She looked back at him with eyes that held a question and an answer at the same time. "Don't you dare let go. You can send the sheriff," Cole said. His voice was quiet enough that the room had to lean in to hear it. "You can send the territorial marshal. You can send every badge between here and the state line. But those girls walked out of that auction with me, and they will walk out of this hall with me. And if anyone in this room wants to change that, they are going to have to look those children in the eye and carry them out screaming." He let the words sit. "And I reckon that is a memory most folks here are not prepared to live with." Dead silence. Pruitt's hands were flat on the table. For the first time since the hearing had begun, he had no prepared response, no procedural counter, no scripture to reach for. He was a man who had built his authority on the certainty that no one would ever simply refuse, and Cole Whitaker had refused plainly and finally, and in front of everyone. Webb leaned to Pruitt's ear. Pruitt did not move for a long moment. Then, in a voice that had lost something it had walked in with, he said, "The board will recess for deliberation." People filed out. Some stopped to shake Cole's hand. Others walked past without looking. The Hargroves moved to a corner and spoke to their lawyer in tight, urgent whispers. Mrs. Vance gathered her things and left without speaking to anyone, which was more telling than anything she might have said. Cole sat with Rosie on his knee, and Nora pressed against his side, and they waited. Outside the hall, the sun was brutal and high, and the street was loud with the sound of a town trying to decide what it believed. Nora looked up at him. "You said no," she said. "I did. You might go to jail." "I might. What happens to us if you do?" Cole looked down at her. The shaking had left her hands. What was left was something quieter and harder. The specific stillness of a child who has asked the most important question she knows how to ask, and is waiting to find out if the answer is going to be another loss. "Then you go to Pharaoh," he said. "You take Rosie, and you go straight to the sheriff and you tell him I sent you. He'll keep you safe until I get it sorted." "I don't want to run anymore," Nora said. "I'm so tired of running." "I know," Cole said. "But sometimes running ain't giving up. Sometimes it's surviving long enough to fight again." Nora leaned her head against his arm. She didn't say anything else. She just sat there and waited, and the three of them together, the rancher and the 8-year-old and the 4-year-old who had called him Papa, in a room full of people deciding their lives, sat in the August heat and waited for 3 men inside a wooden building to tell them whether they were still a family. They waited 43 minutes. Cole counted them the way a man counts the seconds between lightning and thunder. Not because counting changes anything, but because it gives the hands something to do, while the mind runs its worst possibilities. Rosie fell asleep against his chest at the 20-minute mark, one fist curled in his shirt, completely unbothered by the fact that 3 strangers were deciding the rest of her life inside a wooden building 30 feet away. She had the extraordinary gift of children who have survived hard things, the ability to sleep anywhere in any position through any amount of uncertainty, because their bodies understood that rest was not a luxury but a weapon. Nora did not sleep. She sat beside Cole on the bench outside the hall with her new boots flat on the ground, and her hands in her lap, and her eyes on the door. She had stopped shaking. What was left was the particular stillness that comes after fear burns all the way through and leaves something harder and quieter in its place. People came and went around them. Some nodded, some didn't. A farmer Cole recognized from the feed store stopped and gripped his hand without a word and walked on. 2 women from the church quilting circle passed on the far side of the street, and one of them looked at Nora with an expression that wasn't quite guilt, but was adjacent to it, the look of someone who has done nothing wrong in the legal sense and cannot stop thinking about it. At the 43rd minute, the door opened. Harold Webb stepped out and cleared his throat. "The board has reached a decision. All parties return inside." Cole stood. Nora stood. He picked up Rosie without waking her, and she resettled against his shoulder with a small sound and stayed asleep. They walked back into the hall together, the 3 of them, and they sat in the same chairs and faced the same table, and Nora reached over without looking at Cole and gripped the fabric of his sleeve in her fist and held on. Pruitt did not speak. He sat with his hands clasped on the table and his eyes on the middle distance, and something had gone out of him in the 43 minutes. Not his authority exactly. Something beneath it. The certainty. The unquestioned assurance that the room would arrange itself to his liking because it always had. It was George Sutton, the half-deaf retired cattleman, who read the ruling. He stood, slowly adjusted his spectacles, squinted at the paper in his hands, and spoke in the careful, deliberate manner of a man who wanted to be sure he was heard. "This board finds," he said, "insufficient cause to remove Nora Jean Whitlock and Rosie Mae Whitlock from the custody of Mr. Cole Whitaker at this time." Nora's grip on Cole's sleeve went so tight he felt it in the bone. "However," Sutton continued, "temporary guardianship is granted on the following conditions. Mr. Whitaker must file for formal adoption through the territorial court within 60 days. He must submit to a home inspection by a county representative, and he must present himself and the children at Harlan's Creek Church once per month for the duration of the guardianship period." He folded the paper. He sat down. Nora turned to Cole. Her face was a question and a statement and a held breath all at once. "Does that mean—" "It means we stay," Cole said. His voice came out rough at the edges, like it had traveled a long way to get there. Something happened to Nora's face then that Cole knew he would carry for the rest of his life. All the steel she had been building since before she was old enough to know she was building it, all the iron walls and the careful distances, and the watching and the measuring, it came down at once, not gradually, not in pieces, but all of it in a single exhale, like a structure that had held past its limit and finally had permission to stop. She pressed her face into his arm and sobbed. Not quietly, not with any of the controlled restraint she had applied to every other hard moment in the week since her mother died. This was the crying of a child who had been holding the world together with nothing but stubbornness and love and had just been told she could set it down. It came out of her full and ragged and completely unguarded, and it was the most honest sound Cole had heard in 8 months. Rosie woke up. She looked at her sister with wide, confused eyes. "Why is Nora crying?" Cole pulled Nora against his side with his free arm and held both of them. "She's happy," he said. His voice was not entirely steady. "That's a strange way to be happy," Rosie said. "Yeah," Cole said. "It is." Pruitt rose from his chair without a word. He gathered his papers with the careful movements of a man reassembling himself in public, straightened his collar, and walked out through the side door. He did not look at Cole. He did not look at the girls. He stopped only briefly beside Mrs. Vance and said something low enough that only she could hear, and Mrs. Vance's expression shifted into something that was not disappointment, but harder than it, and not yet finished. Nora didn't see it. She was still crying. Cole held her and let her because some things need to come all the way out before they stop doing damage from the inside. Sheriff Farrow stopped at Cole's shoulder on his way past. He didn't say anything. He just put his hand briefly on Cole's arm and then walked out, and that was enough. They drove home in the late afternoon light with Rosie asking questions about Bo that nobody answered because nobody was listening, and she didn't seem to mind. Nora sat on the bench beside Cole, not in the wagon bed beside him where she had placed herself that morning, and she didn't say much. She had her arms wrapped around herself, and she looked at the road with an expression Cole couldn't fully read, but recognized in the general sense the look of someone recalibrating, measuring a world that had just shifted under them, and trying to decide if the ground was solid enough to stand on. When they crested the last hill and the ranch came into view, Bo was on the porch with his gray head uptail, moving slowly, as though he had known exactly when to expect them. Rosie was out of the wagon before it stopped. She hit the ground running and flung herself at the dog with her arms wide and her voice at full volume, informing him that they had won, and that she had been very brave, and that she had a surprise for him that was unfortunately not present, but would be acquired at the earliest opportunity. Nora climbed down slowly. She stood in the yard and looked at the house. Cole watched her look at it. He watched her take in the porch and the fence and the fields beyond, and the road they'd come in on, and he saw her do the thing she always did. Count the exits, measure the distances, locate the way out. And then he saw her stop doing it. Not all at once. But she looked at the house for a long moment after the calculating was done, and something in her shoulders came down a quarter inch, and she walked toward the porch without checking behind her. That night after Rosie was asleep and the lamp was turned low, Nora found Cole at the kitchen table with his hands flat on the wood, staring at nothing in particular. She sat down across from him. She had Margaret's locket in her hand, turning it slowly by the chain. "I called you Papa today," she said, when Rosie said it in the room. She looked at the locket, not at him. "After, when I was telling her you'd come home, I said Papa." Cole was quiet. "I didn't plan to," Nora said. "It came out." "I know. If that's not okay, I won't." "It's okay," he said. His voice was rough and low and carried the sound of something that had been sitting in a very tight space finally being given room. "It's more than okay, Nora." She nodded once, sharp businesslike the way she handled anything that threatened to crack her open. Then she set the locket on the table between them. "I've been keeping this in the room like you said," she told him. "I keep it under the pillow. I look at it sometimes." She paused. "She looks kind." She was. "The kindest people always go first," Nora said. "My mama was kind too, not soft kind, the kind that cost something." She pushed the locket a fraction of an inch toward him. "You should know I'm going to keep taking good care of it." "I know you will." "I'm going to take care of a lot of things," she said. "That's just how I am. I can't turn it off. I'm not asking you to." She looked up at him then. Really looked the same way she'd been looking at him since the auction block searching for the thing that would tell her when to run. She looked for a long time. "Thank you," she said finally. "For today. For all of it. For the auction and the hearing and the key and the rifle lesson. And for burning the bread so bad that somebody had to learn to cook just to keep us alive." Cole almost laughed. "You can take credit for the bread improvement." "I intend to." She stood up from the table. At the doorway, she stopped. "You should sleep," she said. "You look terrible." "Thank you, Nora. I'm serious. You've got circles under your eyes and you cut yourself shaving." "I'm aware." She looked at him for one more moment. Then she went down the hall. The lock turned. Cole sat at the kitchen table for a while longer, listening to the house settle, and felt the strange and unfamiliar sensation of a day that had been survived and was now quietly becoming the past. 3 days of something close to ordinary followed, and those 3 days were the kind Cole hadn't known he was missing until they arrived. He fixed fence on the south pasture with Nora sitting on the rail, critiquing his technique. He cooked breakfast twice without burning anything, and both times Nora said nothing about it, which was her version of high praise. Rosie taught Bo to roll over with a patience and persistence that impressed Cole more than he said. And on the morning she finally succeeded, she ran into the kitchen yelling about it with a joy so complete and unguarded, it rearranged something in the air of the room. On the 4th morning, Nora came to breakfast and sat in her chair, the one closest to the door facing the window, and she ate her eggs without inspecting them first, and she drank her water without checking where it had come from. And Cole noticed these things, the way a farmer notices the first good rain after a dry spell. Not by looking directly at it, but by the way everything around it changes. The filing needed to happen. Cole told her at breakfast that he had to ride to Wichita to submit the adoption papers to the territorial court in person. The board ruling was temporary. 60 days to file, and he wasn't using 60 days. He wanted it done. Nora set her fork down. How long? 2 days out, maybe 3. You're leaving us here. Sheriff Farrow will check in. Ada Hollis from the next ranch is bringing supper both nights. I don't know Ada Hollis. She's the one who brought the beans. She's 72 and half blind, and she makes the best cornbread in the county. Cornbread doesn't mean trustworthy. Nora. Pruitt put a note on the barn, she said. Her voice was flat and precise. He came into this yard in the night while we were sleeping. You want to ride 60 miles away and leave us with a 72-year-old woman who can't see, and a dog who's older than most of the arguments in this territory. Cole leaned forward. I know what I'm asking. I know it's asking a lot. But the papers have to be filed in person. There's no other way. Nora pushed her eggs around her plate. She looked out the window at the road. She looked back at him. If someone comes while you're gone, she said. What do I do? You lock the door. You take Rosie to the root cellar. You don't come out until you hear Farrow's voice specifically. And if it's not Farrow, Cole held her gaze. There's a rifle above the mantel. I'm 8 years old. I know how old you are. I'm not asking you to shoot anyone. I'm asking you to make enough noise that Farrow hears it 3 miles out. Nora was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Teach me to load it. Cole started to speak. Don't, she said. Don't tell me I don't need to know. You're leaving us alone 2 days, and Pruitt already came here once. Teach me to load it or don't go. He studied her face. There was no fear in it. There was calculation, the same cold, practical math she had been doing since before she was old enough to have words for it. She was right. He knew she was right. He also knew that no 8-year-old should need to be right about something like this, and knowing both things at once sat in him like a stone. After breakfast, he took her to the barn and showed her how to open the breech, how to seat the cartridge, how to close it. He showed her 3 times. Her hands didn't shake on the 3rd pass. 1 shot, he said. That's all you do. Then you get to the cellar. 1 shot, she repeated. She ran the motion again without being asked, smooth and deliberate. I understand. He left before dawn the next day. He stood on the porch in the dark for a moment before he mounted, looking at the closed door of the girls' room. Then the door opened. Nora stood in the doorway fully dressed, her arms crossed her face carrying the particular expression of someone who has not slept and is not going to mention it. You're coming back, she said. Not a question. I'm coming back. 2 days. 2 days. 3 at most. If it's 4, I'm coming to find you. You don't know the road to Wichita. I'll figure it out. She held his gaze. I always do. He believed her. He mounted his horse, and he rode into the dark, and he did not look back, because if he looked back, he would not leave, and the papers had to be filed. The first day at the ranch passed without incident. Ada Hollis arrived at noon exactly with cornbread and a stew that smelled like something a person wanted to sit down in front of for an hour. And she talked to Rosie about a mule she'd once owned, and a winter that froze the creek solid enough to drive cattle across. And Rosie listened with her chin in her hands and her eyes wide. Nora ate the cornbread and watched Ada, the way she watched everything carefully, and without committing to any conclusion until she had enough information. "You remind me of my granddaughter," Ada said, patting Nora's hand. She had those same eyes, like she was keeping score. "I am keeping score," Nora said. Ada laughed, a real one, the kind that comes from the belly. "Good girl," she said. "Never stop." When Ada left, Nora locked the door, fed Rosie, checked every window, and sat in Cole's chair at the kitchen table, with the loaded rifle leaning against the wall 3 feet away. She did not sleep. The second day was when Pruitt came. Nora heard the horses before she saw them. Multiple horses moving fast, which meant it wasn't a neighbor or a traveler. She dropped the egg basket in the coop, grabbed Rosie from the yard, and had the front door locked and Rosie behind the kitchen table in under 30 seconds. She was at the window with the rifle in her hands before the riders reached the gate. 3 men. 2 she didn't know, broad through the shoulders, the kind of men hired to make a point without making a sound. The third was Pruitt. He dismounted the way he did everything slowly and deliberately, a man who had never in his life needed to hurry because the world had always waited for him. He walked to the porch. He knocked 3 times, measured, patient. "Mr. Whitaker," he called. His voice was friendly in the way of something that had learned to imitate friendliness without understanding it. "The county board has authorized an interim inspection of the premises. Please open the door." Nora said nothing. She watched through the window. Pruitt knocked again. "Mr. Whitaker, failure to cooperate with the terms of the guardianship order will result in—" "He ain't here." Nora's voice came through the door, flat and hard and completely steady. She hadn't planned to speak. The words arrived before the decision did. A pause. "Clara, is that you, child?" "Nora, and you knew he wasn't here. You waited until he left." Another pause longer. "I don't know what you mean. The board scheduled this inspection on a routine basis." "Nobody scheduled anything. Sheriff Farrow would have told us. You came out here because you knew he was gone, and you thought 2 girls alone would open the door." Her hands were tight on the rifle, but her voice did not shake. "You were wrong." One of the mounted men shifted his horse. Pruitt straightened his collar. "Nora, open this door. I need to verify the children's welfare. It is my legal—" "It's not legal to come onto someone's property without notice and try to force your way in when the guardian is absent. My mama taught me that." A pause. "Don't talk about my mama. I know what you're going to say, and don't." Pruitt's composure slipped 1 fraction. "I am trying to help you. You are trying to take us. There's a difference. Mr. Whitaker taught me that. Mr. Whitaker is not your father. He's the closest thing I got." Her voice was steady and final. "And he's more than anything you ever offered." Pruitt stepped back from the door. He looked at the 2 men on horseback. Something passed between them, a decision being made about whether to escalate. "Open this door, Nora. I will not ask again. There is a rifle pointed at this door, Elder Pruitt." Her voice did not rise. "I am not going to shoot you, but I will fire 1 shot, and it will carry 3 miles, and Sheriff Farrow will be here inside of 20 minutes. And then you are going to have to explain to him why 3 grown men rode out to a ranch with 2 children and no adult guardian, and tried to force their way inside." She let that sit. "I reckon that explanation is going to be hard to make sound like Christian charity." Silence. One of the hired men leaned toward Pruitt. "Horace." His voice was low and tight. "The girl's right. Farrow finds out about this, we're done. The board ruling the petition, all of it." Pruitt did not move for a long moment. He stared at the door. He stared at it the way a man stares at a wall he has hit that he did not see coming, assessing it, looking for the seam, finding none. Then he turned and walked back to his horse. He mounted. He looked back at the door once. "This is not finished, Nora." "No, sir," she said. "But you're the one leaving." The hooves faded. The dust settled. Nora stood behind the door with the rifle in her hands and waited until the last sound of horses disappeared completely before she let her knees go. She slid down the door to the floor. She pressed both hands over her mouth. Her whole body was shaking, the fine, deep shaking that comes after the thing is over, and the body finally gets permission to feel what it held off during. She sat on the floor with her back against the door and shook and did not make a sound. Rosie crawled out from behind the table. She looked at Nora with the serious, attentive eyes of a 4-year-old who understood that something important had just happened. She sat down next to her sister on the floor and put her head against Nora's arm. "Are you scared?" Rosie asked. "I was," Nora said. "I'm okay now." "Is he coming back?" "Not today." "Is Papa coming back?" Nora closed her eyes. She put her arm around Rosie and pulled her close and held on the way she had held on every night since their mother died, tight and careful, the way you hold something you have already lost once and know the cost of. "Yeah," she said. "Papa's coming back." It was the second time she'd used the word without deciding to, and this time she didn't think about taking it back. She let it stand. She let it mean what it meant. Cole returned on the evening of the second day, an hour before sundown, riding harder than the distance required. Something had been pulling at him since noon, a feeling in his gut he had learned not to ignore over 40 years of life and 2 cattle drives and 1 flash flood and 8 months of grief that had tried to finish what the flood had started. He came over the ridge and saw the ranch hole below him and exhaled once hard. Then he saw Nora on the top porch step with the rifle across her knees, and he dismounted before the horse had fully stopped. "What happened?" he said. Not a question. Nora looked at him. She was calm in the way that comes after the ash quiet that follows the fire. "Pruitt came," she said. "Yesterday. 3 men. He wanted inside." Cole went cold straight through. "Did he get in?" "No." "Did he touch you?" "No. I told him there was a rifle pointed at the door and that Pharaoh would hear the shot from town. He left." Cole sat down on the step beside her. He put his head in his hands and stayed there for a long moment. When he looked up, his eyes were red at the rims and his jaw was tight. "I shouldn't have gone," he said. "You had to go. I should have found another way." "There wasn't another way. You said so." Nora looked at him steadily. "Did you get them? The papers?" Cole reached inside his coat. He pulled out a leather folder, and inside it, heavy and official, and stamped with the territorial seal, was the document he had ridden 60 miles to file and 60 miles back to bring home. He opened it and held it toward her. She read it slowly. Her lips moved on the legal words, stumbling over the formal language, understanding every part that mattered. At the bottom, in careful ink, 2 names: Nora Jean Whitlock, Rosie May Whitlock. Petition for adoption filed by Cole Henry Whitaker. She touched the edge of the paper with 1 finger, gently, like it might decide not to be real if she pressed too hard. "That's us," she said. "That's you." His voice was rough. "Turner at the bottom means me. Your names don't change unless you want them to. That's your choice. Always your choice." Nora ran her finger along the line where her name sat in someone else's handwriting on official paper, with an official seal permanent and recorded and belonging to the world in a way that could not be quietly undone. She read it again. Then she closed the folder and handed it back. "Keep it somewhere safe," she said. "Safer than the bread," he said. She almost smiled. Not quite. The shape of it moved across her face and then settled into something quieter, something that was its own kind of warmth. She stood up from the step and propped the rifle against the porch rail. She looked at him with an expression he had not seen on her before, not the measuring look, or the watchful look, or the look that was always calculating the distance to the nearest exit. This was something without armor in it. "I called you Papa again," she said, "while you were gone, when Rosie was scared, and I was telling her you were coming back." She looked at the rifle instead of him. "I didn't plan it." Cole could not speak. His throat had closed entirely. "If that's not okay..." "It's okay," he said. The words came out barely above a whisper, worn rough at every edge. "Nora, it is more than okay." She nodded once, sharp and quick. Then she turned and walked inside, and he heard her telling Rosie that supper needed making, and the eggs were not going to collect themselves, and yes, Papa was home, and yes, Bo could come in for 5 minutes and not a second more. Cole sat on the porch step, with the leather folder pressed against his chest, and listened to the sounds of 2 girls moving through his house, and he understood with a clarity that required no words, and admitted no argument, that the papers in his hands were only the world catching up to something that had already happened. The real thing, the actual and irreversible thing, had been decided by a 4-year-old in a room full of strangers, and confirmed by an 8-year-old on a porch with a rifle across her knees, and no court, and no elder, and no amount of Pruitt's patience and planning could reach back and undo it. They were already a family. They had been for some time now. The papers were just the proof. The victory from the board hearing lasted 3 days before Pruitt made his next move, and when it came, it arrived not through the front door, but through the mail. The way the most dangerous things always do, quietly, and with official paper and a seal that meant someone far away had already been told a version of the story that wasn't true. Sheriff Farrow rode out on the 48th morning since the auction. Nora saw him from the yard, and knew before he dismounted that the news was bad. His posture said it. The way he held his hat when he swung down said it. She set down the water pail and walked to the fence and stood there and waited. Cole came out of the barn wiping his hands. He looked at Farrow. He looked at Nora. He said nothing. Farrow turned his hat slowly in his hands. "Pruitt wrote to the territorial judge in Wichita 3 weeks ago," he said. "I just found out this morning from a clerk who owed me a favor. The letter argues that the board ruling was improperly made, and that the adoption petition should be denied on grounds of moral unfitness." He paused. He also attached a counter-petition from the Hargroves. "They're still in this, Cole. They've been waiting." Cole's hands went still. The board already ruled. The board's ruling was temporary. The final word belongs to the territorial judge, Judge Aldous Whitmore. He holds court on the 2nd Tuesday of every month. Your petition is on the docket. Farrow looked at his boots. So is the Hargrove counter-petition. Pruitt made sure of that. Same day, same hearing. "He got there first," Cole said. 3 weeks ahead of you." Nora had been listening from the fence with her arms crossed and her face still. Now she stepped forward. "What does that mean? That the judge already has his mind made up?" Farrow looked at her. He did not talk down to her. He had learned better than that in the first 2 minutes of knowing her. "It means the judge has heard one version of the story," he said. "And it means you've got 12 days to make sure he hears the other one." After Farrow rode away, Cole stood at the barn wall with both hands pressed flat against the wood and his eyes closed. Nora stood in front of him and waited. She had learned that he needed a moment when the news was very bad not to fall apart, but to contain it, to get his hands around the shape of it before he could move. She gave him the moment. When he opened his eyes, she said, "We go to Wichita. All 3 of us. We stand in front of that judge, and we tell him the truth. Nora, don't." Her voice was quiet, but it had iron in the center of it. "Don't tell me to wait here. Don't tell me it'll be fine. The last time someone told me it was going to be fine, my mother was dying, and the doctor was lying, and nothing was fine for a very long time after that." She held his gaze. "I want to look at that judge. I want him to see us. Not letters, not Pruitt's version. Us." Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the house where Rosie was inside talking to Beau about something that was clearly very important based on the seriousness of her tone coming through the screen door. He looked back at Nora. "It's 2 days on the road," he said. "I've done harder things than sitting in a wagon for 2 days." "You have," he said. "You surely have." They left 2 mornings later before the sun was fully up. Ada Hollis agreed to watch the ranch. Farrow rode ahead to arrange lodging at a boarding house in Wichita run by a widow named Mrs. Crane, who owed him a favor from a property dispute he'd settled 4 years back. Nora packed what they needed in one bag without being asked and had it on the porch before Cole had finished hitching the horse. The ride stretched long and flat under the August sky, the prairie unrolling around them in every direction, like a story with no edges. Rosie slept through most of the first day curled in a nest of blankets in the wagon bed. Nora sat on the bench beside Cole and watched the road ahead with the focused attention she brought to everything that mattered. "Papa," she said somewhere in the second hour. "Yeah." "What if the judge says no?" "Then we appeal." "What if the appeal says no?" "Then we appeal that." "And if they all say no?" Cole pulled the horse to a slow stop. He turned and looked at her directly in the way she had learned meant he was about to say something he needed her to actually hear. "Then I sell the ranch," he said. "And I take you and Rosie somewhere they can't reach us. Montana if we have to. Oregon, California. I don't care where. But we stay together. That is the only thing I care about. You hear me?" Nora searched his face. She did the thing she always did. Looked for the crack, the hesitation, the place where the words were more solid than the man behind them. She found nothing. "I hear you," she said. They rode the rest of the way without much talking, which between the two of them had come to mean something comfortable rather than something empty. Wichita was larger than anything Nora had encountered, louder and faster, and full of strangers moving in every direction with the particular urgency of people who had somewhere to be and no interest in anyone who didn't. Rosie pressed her face into Cole's shoulder and refused to look up for the first 10 minutes. Nora kept her eyes open wide enough for both of them, cataloging exits and street corners, the way she cataloged everything automatically and without stopping. Mrs. Crane's boarding house was clean and narrow and smelled of pine soap and something baking. She gave them 2 rooms and served supper without asking questions which Nora appreciated more than she could have explained. Farrow came by after the girls were in bed and talked to Cole on the narrow porch outside. Nora sat inside with her ear near the window gap. She had never once pretended she wasn't listening when it mattered, and Cole had never once pretended he didn't know she was. "Pruitt got here Saturday," Farrow said. "He's been here 4 days. He's brought the Hargroves and their lawyer and 3 character witnesses from the church board. Whitmore is a fair man by reputation, but he's traditional. He believes in proper order and proper households, and he's going to look at Cole Whitaker widower. No wife, no formal education ranch 40 miles from town, and he is going to have questions." "Let him have questions," Cole said. "He's going to want answers that sound like what he expects a good home to look like." "Then I'll tell him what a good home actually looks like," Cole said, "and we'll see which one holds up." Nora lay back on the bed in the dark after the voices stopped. Rosie was already asleep, one hand on the pillow between them, where Beau would have been, if Beau had been allowed to come, which he had not been a decision Rosie had registered her formal objection to, and then accepted with surprising grace. Nora looked at the ceiling. She thought about her mother the way she always thought about her mother, when things were at their most uncertain. Not with the raw grief of the early weeks, but with something that had aged into a different shape, heavier in some places and lighter in others, like a stone that has been carried long enough to fit the hand. She thought about what her mother would say about tomorrow. She thought she probably knew. Get up. Stand straight. Let them see you. In the morning, Nora braided her own hair, and then Rosie's, and she laced her boots tight, and she put on the dress that was least worn at the elbows. And she looked at herself in the small mirror above the basin and said nothing out loud, but something in her expression settled and went still the way a person's face goes still when they have made a decision they intend to keep. The courthouse was stone and brick and larger than the whole main street of Harlan's Creek. The hallway inside echoed and smelled of old wood and ink. Nora counted the doors. She counted the windows. She kept hold of Rosie's hand and matched Cole's pace, and did not look at the people who turned to watch them pass. Pruitt was outside the courtroom in his best suit. Beside him stood a man in a black coat with a leather case, and beside them, the Hargroves, Philip Hargrove with his watch chain, and Louise Hargrove with her white summer gloves, both of them arranged with the composed stillness of people who had won things before and expected to win this. Louise Hargrove crouched toward Rosie with a practiced smile. "Hello, sweetheart. What a pretty little girl." Rosie leaned into Cole's leg and looked at the woman without expression. "I want to go home," she said. Louise Hargrove's smile tightened at the corners. She looked up at her husband. Nora stepped between Rosie and the woman. She didn't say anything. She just stood there with her shoulders square and her chin level, and her eyes communicating something that required no translation. They went inside. Judge Aldous Whitmore was not what Nora had expected. He was younger than Pruitt by 10 years, with a thick gray-streaked beard, and the steady, unhurried eyes of a man who had heard 10,000 stories and had stopped being impressed by the ones that arrived with the most preparation. He sat behind the raised bench and reviewed his papers while both parties settled, and his face gave nothing away, which Nora decided was either a good sign or a very bad one, and she couldn't tell which yet. Pruitt spoke first, and spoke well, the way he always did, with the practiced confidence of a man who had never in his professional life been required to doubt himself in public. He laid out the case in careful, reasonable language. Widower. No church standing. No female presence in the home. Children acquired through public sale. He made it all sound like concern. He made himself sound like the reasonable party, the one trying to protect the children from a situation no sensible judge could endorse. Whitmore let him finish. Then he picked up a document from his desk and looked at it for a moment. "Elder Pruitt," he said, "you signed the authorization for the public auction at which these children were sold." Pruitt's composure held, but something shifted behind it. "The auction was conducted in accordance with territorial. You set the terms. You permitted the siblings to be listed for separate sale." Whitmore set the document down. "I want to be very clear that I have read the full record of that proceeding, Elder. All of it." He looked at Pruitt over the edge of his spectacles for a moment that went on long enough to mean something. Then he moved on. The Hargroves were introduced. Their lawyer spoke about their home and their standing and their resources and their 3 grown children and their genuine Christian desire to provide for a child in need. He spoke for 8 minutes without saying anything that Nora hadn't already heard in one form or another from people who had wanted Rosie and not her. Whitmore let him finish too. Then he looked at the Hargroves directly. "You are seeking custody of the younger child only. Is that correct?" Louise Hargrove spoke. "Your Honor, we feel we can provide an excellent home for one of them," Whitmore said. "Not both. The older girl has certain—" She paused, selecting her word carefully. "Challenges that we feel are beyond our current capacity to." "She is 8 years old," Whitmore said. His voice had not changed in tone, but it had changed in some quality beneath the tone, something that made the room pay closer attention. "What challenges does an 8-year-old present that give you pause, Mrs. Hargrove?" Louise Hargrove said nothing. Nora stood up. Cole reached for her. She was already moving the same way she had moved in the county hall in Harlan's Creek, with the total commitment of someone who has decided and is done deciding. "I'm right here," she said. "You're talking about me like I'm not in the room, and I am right here, ma'am." Whitmore looked at her. His expression was unreadable, but he did not tell her to sit down. I'm the one with the challenges, Nora said. I talk back. I ask questions people don't want to answer. I don't trust easy, and I don't pretend I do. I locked my door every night for the first 2 weeks at Mr. Whitaker's ranch because I didn't know if I was safe. She looked at Whitmore directly. He gave me the key. He said it was my room, my door, my choice who came through it. That's the first choice anybody ever gave me. Whitmore was quiet. I stood on an auction block, Nora said, in the town square, on a Sunday, and the whole town watched, and some of them laughed, and the only person who moved was Mr. Whitaker. He didn't know us. He came to town for fence wire. She stopped. She took one breath. He never did get that fence wire. Someone in the gallery made a sound that was almost a laugh and caught itself. I ain't easy, Nora said. I know that. But my sister is 4 years old, and she still reaches for me in the night when she has a bad dream. She still needs me to tell her Mama is watching when she's scared. If you put her in that house without me, she's going to cry herself sick for 6 months, and nobody in that house will know why, because they won't know her the way I know her. Her voice was steady, and it was going to stay steady because she had decided it would. You want to know what a good home looks like, Judge? It looks like a man who burns bread every other morning but sits on the porch at night to make sure we're safe. It looks like a dog who sleeps on my sister's feet. It looks like a key on a hook and a quilt with stars on it, and somebody who fought a church board and rode 60 miles and came back the same day he said he would. She stopped. That's what a good home looks like. I've seen the other kind. I know the difference. The courtroom was absolutely still. Whitmore looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Cole. Mr. Whitaker, he said, your turn. Cole stood. He set Rosie gently in the chair beside Nora and stepped forward and did not look at his hands or at the floor. He had thrown away every prepared speech he'd tried to write, and he was going to say what was true and nothing else, because the truth was all he'd ever had, and it had gotten him this far. I ain't educated, he said. I ain't wealthy. I got 40 acres and a house that needs a new roof and a dog that is older than most legal arguments I've heard in this room today. 2 people in the gallery smiled. Whitmore did not, but something in the set of his mouth shifted fractionally. I can't give you a wife in the household. I can't give you church attendance or a gold watch chain or a house in Wichita. What I can give you is my word. And anyone who knows me will tell you that's all I've ever had and all I've ever needed to stand behind. He paused. Those girls call me Papa. I didn't ask for it. I didn't earn it on purpose. They gave it to me because they decided I was worth it, and I have spent every single day since trying to be the man they think I am. That's all I got to say. I don't think I need to say anything else. He sat down. The silence that followed was long enough to become its own kind of verdict. Whitmore picked up his pen. He wrote for a long time. The scratch of it was the only sound in the room. Nora counted the seconds, the way she counted Rosie's breaths at night carefully, and with everything she had. She got to 71 before he set the pen down. The petition for adoption filed by Cole Henry Whitaker, Whitmore said, is hereby granted. Nora Jean Whitlock and Rosie Mae Whitlock are from this date forward the legal daughters of Cole Henry Whitaker, with all rights, protections, and privileges accorded therein. Nora's knees went. She grabbed the chair in front of her and held on with both hands. The counter-petition filed by Philip and Louise Hargrove is denied. This court finds no basis whatsoever for separating these children. None. Whitmore looked at the Hargroves directly when he said it, and Louise Hargrove looked away first. Furthermore, this court formally recommends that the territorial authority review the practice of public auction for orphan children in this and surrounding jurisdictions. The sale of minors, however legally authorized, is incompatible with the dignity this court is sworn to uphold, and I intend to say so in writing to every relevant authority in this territory before the month is out. He set down his pen and looked at Nora. Young lady, he said, you have a considerable future ahead of you in whatever field you choose to direct that particular gift of yours. Nora could not answer. She was crying too hard. Not the controlled, bitten-back tears she had permitted herself at the county hall. Something older and deeper than that, from a place so far inside her that the walls around it had taken 8 years and one very hard season to finally give way. Cole pulled her close. He picked up Rosie with his other arm. He held both of them against his chest and stood in that courtroom while everyone else filed out around them, and he did not move, and he did not speak, and he did not let go. Pharaoh stood by the door with his hat in his hands and his eyes bright and said nothing because there was nothing that needed saying. Pruitt walked past without looking at any of them. He walked the way a man walks when he has lost something in public that he cannot recover in private, straight-backed and deliberate and completely alone. Pharaoh watched him go and did not stop him. Some men Pharaoh had long believed carry their own punishment. They carry it in the silence of every room they enter and every face they've lost the right to meet. The Hargroves left without speaking to anyone. Their lawyer gathered his papers with the efficient movements of a professional who had been paid and had fulfilled his obligation regardless of the outcome and had a train to catch. Nora pulled back eventually and wiped her face with the back of her hand. Her eyes were red and her hair had come half out of its braid, and she looked entirely like a child and entirely like herself. "We won," Rosie announced in case anyone in the room was unclear on this point. "We won," Cole said. His voice was rough at every edge. "Can we get Bo a present?" "Yeah," Cole said. "We can get Bo a present." They stopped at a butcher on the main street who had heard the commotion from the courthouse the way everyone in 3 blocks had heard it, and when Cole reached for his coin, the man shook his head and said the bone was on him, and Nora carried it out wrapped in paper with the particular dignity of someone carrying a trophy, which was exactly what it was. They stayed one more night at Mrs. Crane's boarding house. After supper, after Rosie was asleep, Nora sat on the bed in the lamplight with Margaret's locket open in her palm, looking at the small photograph inside. The woman with the dark hair and the kind eyes who had loved Cole before any of this, who had stitched the quilt with the blue stars, who had known where the kitchen rags were kept. Cole appeared in the doorway. "She would have liked you," he said. "Margaret. She had a particular appreciation for people who didn't back down when they should have and didn't know it." "That's a generous way to describe difficult," Nora said. "It's an accurate way." He leaned against the doorframe. "She was like that herself. It's why she married me, I think. 2 stubborn things that found each other useful." Nora closed the locket gently. "I'll keep taking good care of it," she said. "I know you will." She looked at him for a moment. "Papa," she said. "Yeah. Thank you." She said it plainly and completely without softening it or qualifying it. For all of it. From the beginning. "You came to town for fence wire." "I did. You still haven't gotten it. It keeps not being the most important thing." She almost smiled. The real kind, the full unguarded 8-year-old kind that she had been learning her way back to for 2 months now. It came the rest of the way, this time slow, and then sudden, and it lit her face from the inside like the first good morning after a long winter. "Good night, Papa," she said. "Good night, Nora." He turned from the doorway. Then he stopped. "For what it's worth," he said without turning back around. "You were worth more than everything I walked into that square with. Every coin in that pouch. Every argument in that hall. Every mile to Wichita and back. All of it. Not close." She didn't answer. He didn't need her to. He went to bed. And for the first time in 8 months, he slept without waking. They left Wichita the next morning under a wide blue sky, with the bone wrapped in paper riding in Rosie's lap, and the adoption papers riding in Cole's coat, and the road home stretching out ahead of them, clean and certain, and going somewhere that meant something. When they crested the last hill and the ranch came into view, below, Bo was on the porch with his tail moving and his gray head up, and Rosie was out of the wagon and running before Cole had set the brake. Nora climbed down slowly. She stood in the yard and looked at the house the way she had looked at it on the very first evening, measuring it, taking its dimensions. The porch that needed a board replaced. The barn that had seen better decades. The fence on the south pasture that Cole had fixed with her, sitting on the rail, telling him he was doing it wrong. She looked at all of it, and she did not calculate the distance to the road. Inside, Cole spread the adoption papers on the kitchen table and smoothed them flat with the palm of his hand. The territorial seal, the judge's signature. 2 names written in careful permanent ink at the bottom of a document that would sit in the territorial record for as long as records were kept. Nora Jean Whitaker. Rosie Mae Whitaker. Nora stood beside him looking at the names. She ran her finger along the letters, slowly feeling the indentation of the ink on the paper, the physical fact of it, not replacing what came before, extending it, the way a river doesn't stop being a river when it joins the sea. Whitaker, she said, if you want it. I want it. She looked up at him. Rosie's going to want it too. She already decided. She told Bo this morning. It was a whole conversation. I heard some of it, Cole said. Rosie came in from the porch with Bo behind her, both of them slightly muddy. Neither of them apologetic about it. She looked at the paper on the table and pointed at her name with one finger. That's me. That's you, Nora said. Rosie Mae Whitaker. Rosie said, trying it out. She nodded with the decisive satisfaction of a 4-year-old who has reached a conclusion. That's a good name. It is, Cole said. Bo should have a last name too. Nora looked at Cole. Cole looked at Nora. Bo Whitaker, Nora said finally. Rosie considered this. Bo Henry Whitaker, she said. After Papa. Cole said nothing. He sat down at the kitchen table and put both hands flat on the wood and looked at the papers and was quiet for a moment in the way of a man who has received something so much larger than what he came looking for that he needs a moment to understand the full size of it. The following Sunday they went to church. Not because the board required it anymore. The conditions were fulfilled, the adoption granted, the legal obligation done. They went because Nora said if they were going to live in this town, they might as well make the town learn to live with them, and because Cole said Margaret would have wanted it, and both reasons were true, and neither one canceled the other. They sat in the 4th row. Ruth Calloway, the woman who had spoken in the churchyard weeks ago, the one whose sister had been sold in Missouri, waved from 3 rows back. The schoolteacher who had offered to tutor the girls smiled from across the aisle. The old man who had given them the peach preserves tipped his hat, and his eyes were warm. After the service in the churchyard, Ruth Calloway came to them. She looked at Nora, and she looked at Cole, and she said, I heard about Wichita. I heard what she said in that courtroom. Cole said nothing. My sister was 9, Ruth said. When they sold her. I've been asking for 17 years why nobody stood up. She looked at Nora directly now, woman to child, without any of the softening that adults usually apply when they are trying to protect children from truth. You stood up, she said. In front of all of them. I want you to know somebody noticed. Nora held Ruth's gaze. When I'm grown, she said quietly, I'm going to find the others. The ones who got split up. The ones nobody came for. She said it the way she said everything that mattered, plainly and without decoration, as though it were already true, and the future simply needed to be informed of the fact. I don't know how yet, but I'm going to figure it out. Ruth Calloway looked at this 8-year-old girl with her laced boots and her straight spine, and her eyes that had seen more than eyes that age should have to carry, and she said, I believe you. Pruitt was not in the church that Sunday, or any Sunday after. He had resigned from the board 3 days after the Wichita ruling, citing his health. Everyone in Harlan's Creek knew what that meant, and nobody said it out loud, which was its own kind of verdict. On the ride home, with the wheat fields gold on both sides of the road, and Rosie asleep in Nora's lap, and the afternoon light long and warm across the flat land, Nora spoke without preamble, the way she always did when she had been thinking about something for a while, and had finally finished thinking. Papa? Yeah. Don't ever tell anyone I cried in that courtroom. Wouldn't dream of it. I mean it. I have a reputation. Toughest 8-year-old in the territory. Your secret is safe. She was quiet for a moment. Then she leaned her head against his arm and closed her eyes, and the wagon rolled forward through the gold afternoon, and the ranch came into view around the last bend, the way it always did now, like something reliable, like something that would be there when they arrived. Bo was on the porch. Rosie woke up and called to him before the wagon stopped. Cole set the brake and climbed down and lifted Rosie to the ground and watched her run toward the porch with her arms wide, and then he turned and held out his hand to Nora. She looked at it for 1 second, this girl who had been carrying herself and her sister alone for so long that accepting help was still a thing she had to consciously choose. Then she took his hand and climbed down. She stood in the yard in her laced boots and her worn dress and Margaret's locket tucked against her chest beneath the fabric, and she looked at the house that was hers now, in every way the law knew how to say, and in every way that mattered more than law. She did not check the road. She did not count the windows. She did not calculate how long it would take to reach the gate if she had to run. She just walked toward the porch, and Cole walked beside her, and the screen door creaked open ahead of them, and Rosie was already inside telling Bo about the service and the churchyard and the woman named Ruth, who had cried in a nice way, and could Bo please come to church next time, because he would probably like it. And Nora went inside into the house that smelled of old wood and lamp oil, and the particular warmth of a place that has people in it who intend to stay. She went to the kitchen, and she put the kettle on, and she got the bread down from the shelf, and she began without being asked to make supper. Because in a territory that had once sold children in the town square and called it charity, one man had proven with every mile he rode and every word he said, and every day he showed up, that family is not a matter of blood or paperwork or the opinions of men in starched collars. It is a promise you make with the whole of your life. It is choosing every single morning to be the person that the people who trust you believe you to be. Cole Whitaker had made that promise on a Wednesday in August with a pouch of silver and a single word, and he intended to keep it every day for the rest of his life. And he did.